Senator Paul.
Our founders debated extensively over which branch of government should have the power to declare or initiate war. Virtually unanimously, they decided, and what was entered into the Constitution was that the declaration or initiation of war would be the power of Congress.
Rand Paul just put Marco Rubio on the spot in a Senate hearing, and the exchange that followed is one of the most important constitutional conversations to come out of this entire Iran war debate, because Paul did not come in swinging with partisan attacks. He did not come in defending Venezuela or any foreign government. He came in with one simple question, a question so straightforward that the moment Rubio tried to answer it, the entire legal justification for what this administration did started falling apart in real time. Watch this in full, and I will give you my complete thoughts on the other side.
Now, we have many advocates, many of whom are here today, who have been advocates for an expansive notion of presidential power. They often argue that wars are not really wars, that they're kinetic actions or drug busts. I think, though, if you reverse the circumstances, it becomes very difficult for these arguments to hold up. So I would ask you, if a foreign country bombed our air defense missiles, captured and removed our president, and blockaded our country, would that be considered an act of war?
Well, I think your question is about and I will acknowledge you've been very consistent on all these points the entire career. So let me no matter who's in charge. So I will point to two things. The first is it's hard for us to conceive that an operation that lasted about 4.5 hours and was a law enforcement operation to capture someone we don't recognize as the head of state, indicted in the United States, wanted with a $50 million bounty.
My question would be, if it only took 4 hours to take our president, it's very short, nobody dies on the other side, nobody dies on our side, it's perfect. Would it be an act of war?
We just don't believe that this operation comes anywhere close to the constitutional definition of war.
But would it be an act of war if someone did it to us? Nobody dies, few casualties, they're in and out. Boom, it's a perfect military operation. Would that be an act of war? Of course it would be an act of war. I'm probably the most anti-war person in the Senate, and I would vote to declare war if someone invaded our country and took our president. So I think we need to at least acknowledge this is a one-way argument. One-way arguments that don't rebound, that you can't apply to yourselves, that cannot be universally applicable are bad arguments. So my next question would be, let's say it's not a war. We're just going to define it away and say it's not a war. That's one of the arguments. So it's a drug bust. What if a foreign country indicts our president for violating a foreign law? Should we extradite our president, or should we be okay if they come in and get him by force?
Look, I think ultimately we're always going to act in our national interest. And so if somebody comes after our national interest, like the case you've described, which obviously does not exist at this time, but the case you've described, the U.S. always has the right to act in its national interest and to protect itself. So really I don't know about this equivalency. Well, does this justify them doing it? We're always going to do what's best for the United States and America. We're always going to protect our system.
But the point isn't, and you're exactly right, we will act in our national interest and we should. So I'm not disagreeing with you at all. What I'm saying is, though, that our arguments are empty then. The drug bust isn't really an argument. It's a ruse. The war argument, not a war, is a ruse. It's not a real argument. And we do what we do because we have the force, we have the might, we do it because it's in our interest. So we wouldn't let anybody come in, bomb us, blockade us, and take our president. We've had arguments about legitimate, illegitimate presidents, bad elections, rigged elections. So there's all kinds of same arguments that we've had in our country that they've had in Venezuela. But we wouldn't argue for an indictment. And these things aren't idle speculation. I mean, Netanyahu's been indicted by the ICC. And one of the reasons I object to being part of the ICC, and I would say you and the administration probably agree, is we're not going to let any international council indict our president and arrest him somewhere on foreign soil. We're not going to do that. We actually, most of us probably object to indicting Netanyahu in that way as well. So I think the arguments are invalid. So we did get the legal opinion that Senator Kaine referred to, the OLC opinion, Office of Legal Counsel. And I think a lot of it's been released. Plus, they came to our caucus and talked most of the open about everything they had classified. So I will talk about at least one of the arguments. They say this war wasn't a constitutional war. Therefore, it doesn't rise to the constitutional notion of us declaring or having to initiate the war. It just doesn't rise. And one of their main arguments was not enough people died. And so there is some number that they aren't specific, but there is some number. I would assume, although I'm not positive, but the 50, 60,000 soldiers who died in Vietnam might be enough for them to call that a war. But here's the problem. It isn't the number, it's that it happens in retrospect. See, our founders gave us the power to initiate or declare war. They didn't give us other powers to execute the war. Those are left to the president. But if we have to wait to see how many people are killed, we have to wait, as they describe it, as the scope, nature, and extent. If we have to wait to see the scope, nature, and extent, the war has been going on for some time. It's hard to vote to initiate a war that's been going on. And we can say this war is over, but we're still blockading it, and we may go back in. But there are no clear answers. You know, we put 2,000, we leave 2,000 troops in. Are we going to call that war and initiate it? So the definition of war is very important. And I think we have to acknowledge the problems with our argument. Calling things kinetic action is a disservice to our soldiers. Oh, you weren't really wounded in war. You don't have a Medal of Honor for war. You have a Medal of Honor for a kinetic action. So I think let's call it what it is, and let's vote on these things. But I think we're in violation of both the spirit and the law of the Constitution by bombing a capital, blockading a country, and removing elected officials. And we certainly wouldn't tolerate it, nor would I if someone did it to us.
Well, we didn't remove an elected official. We removed someone who was not elected, and it was actually an indicted drug trafficker in the United States. And their system—
Our laws, indicted under our laws. Look, Bolsonaro says that Da Silva is not really the president of Brazil. Our president said Biden wasn't really the president. Hillary Clinton said in 2016 Trump wasn't the president. So you have these arguments, and I agree with you. It probably was, and most likely was, most assuredly was a bad election. He wasn't really elected. But at the same time, if that's our predicate, and you don't have to come to us because it's a drug bust, we're just removing somebody, you can see where it leads to, and it leads to chaos. And that's why we have rules like the Constitution, so we don't get so far out there that presidents can do whatever they want. It is this check and balance. And I would argue for 70 years we've been going the wrong way. It isn't just this president, but it's a debate that I think is worth having.
What makes this exchange so significant is not that Rand Paul delivered some clever political attacks. It is that he exposed something much deeper and much more uncomfortable. He exposed the fact that Washington has been running a double standard on executive war powers for decades, and that the legal arguments being offered to justify this administration's actions are not actually legal arguments at all. They are justifications built around one simple reality: America has the power to do it. Rand Paul's question was devastatingly simple. If a foreign country bombed American air defenses, seized the President of the United States, and imposed a blockade on American territory, would we consider that an act of war? Every single person in that room knew the answer. Every American watching at home knew the answer. Republicans know it. Democrats know it. The Pentagon knows it. Nobody would stand at a podium and tell the American people that such an operation was merely a law enforcement action, or a kinetic event, or a surgical strike. It would be an act of war. Full stop. No debate. No clever terminology required. And the moment Rubio acknowledged that America would absolutely treat such an action as an act of war, the entire framework he was defending started to unravel. Because if the same action done to us is a war, but the same action done by us is not a war, then you do not have a principle. You have a privilege. And privileges are not constitutional arguments. They are just power wearing the costume of law. To his credit, Rubio eventually gave the most honest answer available to him. He said the United States will always act in its national interest. And that is true. Countries do act in their national interests, but that answer completely abandoned every constitutional and legal defense that had been offered before it. If the real answer is, we did it because we can, and because we decided it served our interests, then stop pretending the action rests on a universally applicable legal principle. That was Paul's entire point, and Rubio never escaped it. Then the conversation shifted to the constitutional question, and this is where it became even more important. For every American, regardless of party, the founders debated extensively about who should hold the power to initiate war. They were not casual about it. They understood that war is the most consequential decision a government can make. It costs lives, it costs money, it expands executive power in ways that are very difficult to reverse. And because of all of that, they deliberately placed the authority to initiate war with Congress, not with the president acting alone, not with a cabinet. Congress representing the people who would bear the cost of that decision. What this administration did, and what administrations from both parties have done for decades, is find creative language to avoid that constitutional requirement. Kinetic actions, limited operations, law enforcement missions, drug busts. The terminology changes, but the effect is the same. Presidents launch military force and Congress is left watching from the sidelines while the shooting has already started. Paul exposed the fatal flaw in the administration's legal reasoning on this point. The argument was essentially that the conflict might not qualify as a constitutional war because casualties were limited. Paul pointed out the obvious problem. If Congress has to wait to see how large the war becomes before deciding whether to authorize it, then by the time the threshold is met, the war is already underway. The bombs have already fallen. The escalation has already happened. Congress becomes a spectator to a decision the founders specifically gave it the authority to make. That is not a technicality. That is a fundamental reversal of the constitutional framework designed to prevent any one person from taking the country to war alone. And here is the broader point that goes beyond this specific hearing. Both parties have benefited from expanding executive war powers. Democrats have launched military operations without congressional authorization. Republicans have done it. Establishment figures on both sides have defended it when their team was in the White House. So when Rand Paul raises these questions, he is not just challenging this administration, he is challenging a decades-long drift toward presidential unilateralism that has slowly hollowed out the congressional war power and the founders considered essential. The reason this exchange stood out is because for a few minutes the conversation moved past partisan loyalty and straight into first principles. Who gets to decide when the United States goes to war? If that decision belongs to one person sitting in the Oval Office, then the checks and balances the founders built into the Constitution become weaker with every administration that pushes the boundary a little further. And the American people who pay for these wars with their tax dollars and their sons and daughters deserve a government that at minimum has an honest conversation about that before the first bombs fall. Rand Paul forced that conversation into the open. And Marco Rubio, one of the most experienced and polished debaters in the Senate, never found a clean answer. Because there is not one. Not if you are trying to apply the same standard to yourself that you apply to everyone else. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on the bell notification. I will see you in the next one.